just so you know that this resource, or maybe you're part of a seed library or some other community project, this course, I'm going to email it to you afterwards, the PowerPoint and the speaker's notes. So if you are part of a community project and would like to have seed saving in your community, we're going to give you this PowerPoint. Everything in it is open, source, license free. So if you know someone who wants to teach this class in your community, they can take it, use it as is, tweak it, do whatever they want to in order to use it in a way that best meets the needs of your community. So know that this is all in the public domain, as should the seeds we steward be. And so I'm going to give you a little bit about myself, and then we will kind of launch in. So a little bit about myself. I'm Rebecca Newbern. I am the co-founder of the Richmond Grows Seed Lending Library that's in Richmond, California, San Francisco Bay Area. I am also the founder of the Seed Library Network. So basically, I started the Richmond Grows Seed Library. We were the seventh seed library, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. And so I decided to kind of create it as more of a network where people could communicate and share resources. So that's how the Seed Library Network grew out of that. And all of our resources, for the most part, for the Seed Library Network are free. We are charging for this class for some of you, and we just appreciate that because it's kind of our one fundraiser for the year. Um, so first off, why would you want to save seeds? So you're obviously here, you have some reason for yourself doing it. So we'll kind of talk about what might be other reasons why people engage in that. We'll talk about the state of seed as it currently kind of exists on this planet. We'll talk a little bit about what is that going to look like for you in terms of kind of a choose your own adventure in your seed saving journey, types of pollination, which helps you understand about how to maintain a variety if that's what you're interested in doing, and then kind of some of the nuts and bolts of seed saving, seed cleaning, and then seed storage. If you happen to be part of a seed library, it's also really good to have a donating policy and what that might look like. So basically, whenever you are donating seeds, whether it's at a seed swap that you're bringing seeds to, the seeds should be dry and clean. And, if you were saving from heirloom or open pollinated, that's going to get seeds that are going to come out like those parent plants. And we don't save from commercial hybrids as a general rule or anything that's plant variety protection. I'll talk more about that later. So we'll talk about the basics of seed saving in this process, but this kind of landing page here of donating seeds is a good thing to be thinking about as if you have offer a seed swap, go to a seed swap, or a part of a seed library. So just kind of get us started. There are lots of reasons why you might want to save seeds. So I just want to kind of people put some thoughts in the chat. So this is a timely 12,000 plus year old tradition, but what's your why? Like, why did you come here today? So if you could just take a moment to kind of put some thoughts into the chat, that would be great. So everybody has different reasons why they might come to this work or to this place of being. Okay, so I see share community grow in a reciprocal relationship with land and community, save favorite varieties, empowering youth, growing food and flowers and sharing them with other people. Okay, wanting to join and learn from other people. Great. There's just so many reasons why to engage. As some people are noticing about the importance of, you know, food sovereignty and being able to have the ability to steward those culturally important varieties in our community. Saving money is also sometimes something that comes up in terms of a need, adapting crops to local conditions. I don't know if I saw it in there too much, but fun is once you get into it, you will. I have to say, the seed saving community and saving seeds is just such a joyful, life affirming process. And for people that are more into creative expression and are more um, perhaps more around food security, allowing the plants to cross-pollinate can really be joyful to see kind of how nature expresses itself in really creative ways. So we're going to just kind of talk about that. Knowing your why is going to be part of helping you to decide the journey that you need to go on. So if something's culturally important or has a specific characteristic, then you're going to want to follow practices that will preserve that variety. If you're more interested in food security, then having a squash for next year might be more important than having a particular squash. So we'll kind of talk about, that kind of different approaches that you might take to your seed saving. But the main thing that you want to know is as you go on this journey of saving seeds and hopefully sharing them with your community, that you label the seeds so that people understand that what journey they're going on with you. Okay. And then also understanding kind of, that whole process. So this is a really interesting um, image. Comes from Phil Howard, who's an associate professor at Michigan State in community agriculture. Um, and so he did this in 2000. He did this kind of mapping of seed companies. So what I want to bring your attention to is the key down on the bottom right-hand side. So people often think they're buying from a local company or even a national company, but they don't really understand that that company might actually be owned by a large company. And when you look at the key, those red dots where a lot of the smaller seed companies are aggregating around are actually pharmaceutical chemical companies. And companies are beholden to create profits for their shareholders, which increases the likelihood of those. So basically, there's an increased interest in those companies to sell seed that work with their other products, which are fertilizers and pesticides. So just kind of, being aware that in 2013, the top three seed companies were actual chemical companies, and they owned 50% of the world's seed. Dr. Howard went back in and he revised this recently. And so his kind of more recent version of this, which was updated in 2022, there are now four firms that control about 60% of the global seed sales. Some of you may be aware of the work of Dr. Vandana Shiva, and she's a leading kind of seed sovereignty advocate and the winner of the Right Livelihood Award. It's kind of like the Nobel Prize for people doing just and sustainable and community-based work. So she won that award in 1993. And I love what she says about when you control food, you control society, but when you control seed, you control life on Earth. And I think it's also really important for us as we are on this journey of saving seeds to really uplift and acknowledge the work of Indigenous people. 80% of the biodiversity in forests, I just want to read this quote because it's so impactful. 80% of the biodiversity in forests, grasslands, deserts, and marine ecosystems are stewarded by Indigenous communities, which are less than 5% of the world's population. So just thinking about how these people are really supporting the larger ecosystem and the important work that they're doing in their communities that we all benefit from and that we can all be part of kind of uplifting and honoring that work, when we also start to engage in stewardship. And so communities have always stewarded and shared, local seeds for generation. And, a number of people are concerned about purchasing and commodifying of seeds by companies outside of our community. That's much more of a recent occurrence. And as many of these seeds are grown in different climates using fertilizers, pesticides, plastic tarping, and other factors that are increasingly the likelihood that these plants aren't adapting to our conditions, but are adapting to those conditions. And so we really want to kind of empower people and empower you to grow your own food and seed and kind of share that bounty with your community. And so one of the things that often in kind of this modern mindset of agriculture is this idea of like uniformity and purity. But if you look historically at our food system, historically our food system was definitely much more diverse. You would go to a community and, their squash might be all different sizes, but it was definitely the squash from this particular people. And, over the last, you know, 150 or so years, we've really bred out a lot of that diversity for uniformity and, purity. And it has advantages and disadvantages, so it's worthwhile looking at, when is that beneficial and when is it maybe not, and deciding for yourself, where do you want to kind of, what's important to you. So kind of in the future, we could choose to celebrate diversity and resilience and plant nutrient dense and delicious foods that also preserve traditional varieties, some of these like traditional varieties that people have stewarded for, hundreds, if not, for generations and generations. So here's another quote from Dr. Vandana Shiva. Uniformity is not nature's way. Diversity is nature's way. And this bottom picture is a picture from a project in Mendocino County with Julia Dakin, who does she's the co-founder of Going to Seed. And they just have a mix of bok choy. So they're really, mixing a lot of them together. And like from that, they're selecting in a community of what nature's taking out some things that don't work because of pests or the climate conditions in cool coastal California. But then after that, then they're selecting for, the flavors and the things that work in their community. And so if you're thinking about this idea of uniformity, an advantage for a farmer is that they know when their produce is going to be ready, and it's going to be ready to go to market at a particular time so they can plan, they can sell. That's great. However, a disadvantage for that would be, let's say, for example, there was an unexpected frost or some other type of event, and it could wipe out the entire crop, in in an afternoon or whatever the event, however long that event lasts. So it makes that uniformity also makes our food system a lot more susceptible to shock. And so these seeds that are commercially grown are likely to have been grown in different climates, as I mentioned, with different external inputs like the fertilizers and the plastic sheeting and protective shade structures. Not necessarily how we're growing them in our communities, not necessarily with the climate and the environmental factors that we are dealing with. So these seeds have been grown to thrive in those conditions, not necessarily in our conditions. And some of you may be familiar with Dr. Kerry Fowler. He was the recipient of the 2024 World Food Prize. He's a renowned agriculturalist and the person, if you know about that, you've heard about that seed vault in Norway, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, that was kind of his creation. And in the 2013 film Seeds of Time, he had a really just impactful quote, which said, "So much of our food production in this world of ours is based on how we're trying to modify the environment to suit the crop variety in the field." So you see this left picture. We're trying to modify our environment to make things work. He's like, if we really want to talk about sustainability and adaptation to climate change, we are going to need to do the opposite of that. We're going to need to adapt the crop variety to the environment. And you can see here's another image from Julia Dakin's project in Mendocino County in California, where they have this genetically diverse mix of squashes, mostly zucchini. And then you can see a picture in her field of here's two different things she planted, and the one circled in green, is just going phenomenally well, and the one right next to it is kind of selecting itself out from the population. And so that is allowing us to adapt to local conditions as opposed to putting down a whole bunch of plastic and, you know, something that most of us are not doing in our own home gardens. So in terms of getting started, it's important to acknowledge that seed saving and seed keeping has been being maintained for generations in many communities. So our ancestors have been saving seeds. We want to really honor the fact that we have the seeds we have because of their relationship to the land and to the plants and to the other elements around them. when I got into seed saving in 2010, I took a course from Bill McDorman, who was at that point, he owned a seed company and a high altitude seed company. He later on became the director of the Native Seed Search, which is a Southwest seed conservation organization. And one of the things that really stuck with me is because a lot of people, when they get started in seed saving, they're really afraid to make mistakes. They're like, oh my gosh, what if I do? What if I mess it up? What if I mess it up? And he's just like, if something doesn't come out like expected, eat our mistakes. And that felt like it gave me so much permission to not be worried. Like we're not professional seed companies. We're not selling our seed. There are definitely standards for selling seed in terms of isolation, how far one variety is from another variety. And we'll talk about, how to do that. But in terms of a home gardener saving for ourselves and saving for our community, sometimes it's okay if there's a little bit of, crossing. So just understand that um, there's a lot more kind of bandwidth or breadth in terms of our expression when we save seeds than if we're in a very kind of narrow industry-based, uniformity and purity model. So as I mentioned in the beginning, there's this kind of idea of like, how are you going to go into your seed saving? So this class is about empowering people to make choices that work for them and the seeds they want to steward. So people may be very interested in preserving a particular variety, while other crops maybe they're a little bit more open to genetic diversity. So this is not an either or, but really acknowledging the importance of these different approaches to seed saving and providing knowledge and skills so that you can save seeds and then you can share high quality information in terms of labeling so that other people that borrow those seeds and plant those seeds after you have a positive experience. So in terms of the kind of choose your own adventure idea, I would say that there are kind of three kind of pathways, although I do a bit of all three of them. So you have to be on one particular way if you don't want to be. You can go very into preserving heirlooms of the past. And if that's your intention of really honoring maybe culturally important seeds from your community, then preserving the heirlooms of the past and the Seed Savers Exchange book is a phenomenal book that I would recommend. Canada, UC Canada, the Bounty Foundation, if I have it on my table here. There's another really one. I'll send it out afterwards, I'll send out a list of resources. So I'll send out one that's from Canada that's more, how would I describe it? It's a little bit more garden focused, whereas the Seed Saver Exchange book could be used by a professional grower because it's at that level of specificity, I would say, in terms of, here's the isolation distances, but once again, in the home garden, we might not meet all those distance requirements based on our spaces. So if you're interested in preserving heirlooms, Seed Garden's a great book. Once again, I'll share these resources with you later. If you're interested in breeding heirlooms of the future, you want to offer something to future generations, the book by Carol Deppe, who's got a PhD in genetics from Harvard, Yale, one of those two. She's got a great book that is really just talking about most of the genetic diversity we have has been done by people like you and I. And so she kind of walks you through how you go about doing that. And she can give some really great examples of people that had really small spaces that were able to breed tomatoes and stuff like that. So she gives some interesting tips and tricks about how to do that in people who don't have a lot of land. And then the other approach is how do we adapt our food supply for now and the future as we go through these kind of rapidly changing kind of climate events. So before we kind of go any further, I want to just make sure we all have kind of a foundation, which is like flower anatomy and kind of how pollination happens. So within a plant, so within a flower, this one is a perfect flower, and it's a perfect flower because it has the male and female parts within the same flower. So there's the anther, which produces the pollen, that's the male part, and then it goes into the stigma, which is the female part. So you have pollination, that's the transfer of the pollen, and then the pollen goes down that tube, and then it fertilizes, one of the eggs, and then it turns into some type of fruit, whether that's a tomato or a zucchini. I know we don't think about zucchini as fruit, but it is technically. And then eventually we need to wait till that those seeds actually are mature for seed saving. So that's kind of the process, the anatomy of the flower, and how you would go to mature seed. The other thing we want to kind of talk about is the type of pollination. So you can have self-pollination. That's when pollen is transferred from the anther, that's the male part, to the female part on the same plant. Okay, and those are called sulfurs. So self-pollination or sulfurs. And the other thing is we could have cross-pollination where the pollen is transferred from the stigma or the male part of one plant to a different plant. And you could see that it could be the same variety or it could be a different variety. And so when it goes from one plant to another, that's cross-pollination, and those are outcrossers. Okay. So in terms of pollination methods, um, so self-pollination is so when we're starting to learn about different plants and how they get pollinated, that's going to really help you understand if it's easy to save or difficult to save. So if something is self-pollinating, these plants tend to be a lot easier to save because the pollen's coming from itself. So it's like mom and dad are the same type of thing. Offspring are going to be the same type of thing. So when they have those perfect flowers and it accepts its own pollen, then that's gonna come out like the parent in most cases. And so things in that category are things like common beans, peas, tomatoes, lettuce, barley, wheat, although most people just do beans, peas, tomato, and lettuce are the common ones. If an insect has to bring pollen from one plant to another, okay, then that insect might have been at a different variety. So like a sunflower is a perfect example. You think about there could be lots of different types of sunflowers and a bee could be floating around from all these different types. And so it's going to mix up the genetics. Same thing with squash. So I could have a zucchini and the spaghetti squash is the exact same species as a zucchini. So if I have both of them or my neighbor's got one of those, then while it looks like a zucchini when I saved it, I mean, it looked like a zucchini, everything about it looked zucchini, but the next year I went to go plant it. If I didn't take precautions, that next generation is going to be a mix of the two things. So knowing if it's self-pollinated, insect pollinated, or wind pollinated is going to help us as we kind of go through the next part of our journey. And then wind pollinated, the wind carries the pollen like the corn and the beets and the chard. And where I live, it's pretty much impossible to get corn that I would say comes out like the parent, just because so many people grow corn in my neighborhood. So we accept corn in our seed library, but we just always mark it as diverse mix. So just know that that's an option if you're saving seeds, just going like it's corn and it might not come out exactly like the parent. So some of the types of seeds, so just kind of some of the vocabulary that's helpful to know. Open pollinated is more of the term that farmers would use versus an heirloom. Heirloom is much more of a marketing term, I would say. So open pollinated just means that when it's allowed to, the male and the female are able to come in contact with each other and you save those seeds, they're going to come out like the parent. Heirloom is more about something that has a face and a place and a story attached to it. So it has more of a heritage or a cultural significance to it. So an open pollinated cultivar or cultivated variety that's been grown for in a particular place or by a family for a while, that's more of an heirloom, though it might not be your heirloom. So that's an important thing to acknowledge when we do this work is like who are the actual traditional keepers of this. And a hybrid is when you have two distinct parents. So it's like there's pink flower and there's, orange flower, but it's the same species. If you brought the pollen from one to the other, those offspring are going to be some mix of this. And sometimes those are predictable crosses. They're predictable how the offspring might come out, and sometimes it can be a little bit random. Landrace is a variety grown and shared within a community that is often dynamic. So in the case of some of these traditional varieties, like for example, squash that was from a particular area, there's a lot of diversity in that landrace mix, but it was grown in that particular community. It was adapted to the specific environments and to the cultural and farming practices of that community. But it's not like this squash all is 5 pounds and comes out within, 110 days. And then Agrex tends to be just a few varieties that were mixed together, allowed to promiscuously pollinate, the pollen kind of going and mixing between them, and kind of a very pretty diverse mix in that mix. And then I didn't put it in here, but PVP is a plant variety protection. So you might see when if you buy seeds to look for that label. So that means that some breeder worked on creating that. And so just as a general rule, we want to really respect the work that traditional plant breeders worked and kind of not sharing those in seed libraries with other people. So just kind of some of the seed saving best practices before we get into the nuts and bolts of how to do different ones is first off, know your seed. Like, don't save from commercial hybrids. And so a lot of people say, oh, don't save from commercial hybrids because they're not going to come out true to type, which is true. So you plant a commercial hybrid, the first generation's fine, but when you save those seeds, they might go all over the place. However, there's a number of commercial hybrids that are bred for male sterility, which means that if you were saving those seeds, you might actually be introducing sterility into your seed line, which is something you obviously don't want to do. Don't say from patented the PVPs or GMOs. If you're if you're starting with buying seeds, I would definitely look. I'd say the one company that's good about labeling if it's a PVP or plant variety protection is Johnny's. So if you buy from Johnny's, look, they do have a lot of PVP varieties. So just make sure you kind of avoid those in your if you're purchasing seeds. And then don't say from patented or from GMO seeds. Typically, GMOs are more geared towards farmers than home scale. But obviously, there was a tomato issue a couple last year or 2 years ago, so it sometimes creeps in there. So be careful about that. And then when you're saving seeds, don't just save the seeds, but save the information. There is some minimum information that you want. For example, common name, varietal name if it exists, or at least a description, the year that you saved the seeds. So seeds are living things and they have a lifespan. And so you want to know if I planted this, is it because it's really old and it didn't work? Is it because it's old seed, or is it maybe a user error that didn't water it well enough, or there was some bugs or something got to it? If there's a description or a story that goes with it, kind of recording that information. And then obviously, if you noticed anything that's useful that you might want to pass on, for example, a drought resistance or it didn't get powdery mildew, unlike all my other squashes, that would be useful information to share with people that you were sharing the seeds with. So some other kind of best practices is about population size. And so population size is the number of individual plants from that variety that are grown and that contribute genetics. So planting a large enough number of plants will help maintain the genetic diversity of a variety. And this is especially important with those outcrossers, the ones that have to get pollen from elsewhere. Some species don't actually are what are called self-incompatible. They don't actually accept their own pollen. For example, I had a purple tree collard. So if you live in this area, you might know what the purple tree collard is, and it tends not to flower at all. It's propagated by cuttings. And one year it actually flowered and I was so excited. I'm like, oh my gosh. Um, and I saved the seeds and I gave it to a master propagator at Merritt College. And he's like, it's not going to probably produce anything. And I'm like, why? And he's like, well, it doesn't accept its own pollen. And he did a whole flat 0 seeds. The next year, my purple tree collard flowered again, but I had the dino kale, the lacinato kale going at the same time. So I let the pollen go between the purple tree collard and the dino kale. And I saved from the purple tree collard. So I know that the mother plant had purple tree collard genes in it, but it accepted the pollen from this other variety. And in that case, I got lots of really interesting mixes that I was really excited about. and I've been able to share in the community. Other things to note is there are certain crops, yeah. For example, like beets and Swiss chard are also self-incompatible. So broccoli, kale, collards, cabbage, beets, Swiss chard, any one of those has to get pollen from another plant of the same species in order to actually produce seeds. Corn is interesting in the fact that it exhibits this thing called the zinnia effect, which is you can actually see the cross in the mother plant. So if you look at this like picture here, like this what happened to me one time. I got all the seed from a seed swap and I was really excited about it. And the next year it was like totally all over the place. And then someone said, well, that's probably not your fault. And I was like, well, I don't know. But it was also, it was probably also crossed. And I didn't really know that it was crossed to begin with. So just know that with corn, you can actually see the cross. Like in this case, mine was like a multicolored corn to begin with. So, but here you can see the ones that would be different. I did a corn breeding project one year, and we were actually looking for crosses. So we were actually pulling out the purple ones and planting those to see what we could get. We were trying to develop a new type of popcorn at school. It was super fun. And then let's see, what else do I want to say? So growing more plants will provide more genetic diversity. Great. Yes, good to know. If you are growing these landrace mixes, these more genetically diverse mixes, the population size isn't as big of an issue just because there's already a lot of genetic variety within that landrace. And what else do I say? Carrots. Oh, carrots, carrots. So carrots are a more like a newer, what did I say? It's newer in terms of a food crop, so it hasn't had as much kind of genetic mutation and variation over centuries and centuries. And as a result, well, first off, it's the wild relative is Queen Anne's lace. And so if you don't grow a large population of carrots, it can easily inbreed in a generation and revert back to the woody and edible Queen Anne's lace. And also, if Queen Anne's lace is growing, when you're growing carrots, that is, I would not save it. There are ways to get around sometimes these population size or this idea of having multiple, like a large number of the same plants. So I like to grow carrots, but the thing to note with carrots is every carrot I plant is going to, turn into a flower at some point. And I have a carrot here. So it's going to turn into like a big, this is just one of many. So it's going to turn into a flower. And then by the time it does this, that carrot is completely inedible. And so, not many people have the bandwidth to plant 50 carrots and let them all go to seed and have like no food to eat as a result and just have a whole lot of seed. So what I do with carrots, and you can do this sometimes with other crops, is I just plant a bunch of different varieties of carrots, and I know it's an intentional, I mean, I don't start with it's an intentional hybrid or mix, but it's not using anything that they're all traditional varieties, so there isn't any male sterility in it. But that's kind of sometimes a way to get around stuff like that. Okay, other things, seed saving best practices. So, thinking about like pure or mixed. So you're going to decide if purity is important to you, and then you're going to kind of, if you are particularly interested in a variety because it has cultural significance or because you like a particular characteristic, then you're going to start with an open pollinated or heirloom variety so that you can kind of maintain that. As I said, it's also fine. For example, I just do a whole bunch of lettuce mixes. In fact, I've even bought some lettuce mixes from plant breeders that just have like a whole collection of like 140 different lettuces, and this is everything in their collection. So that's another way to go. And I just save it, and it's just the loose leaf lettuce mix. And then the other thing to note when you are saving seeds is to always save from the healthy plants. And basically, when you're saving a plant and the seeds from it, you're telling the plant, you're in communication with the plant saying, like, I want more of you. Like, that is kind of the relationship you're doing. You're saving something, you're liking it, and it's going to bring more of that into your life. Now, the other really critical thing I would say when you're doing seed saving is to really label, label, label. So minimum requirements are common name, variety, or a description and the year grown and your name so that people know. Like, for example, we've gotten stuff donated to the seed library and I don't know who it was, and it was a type of squash. And I was like, I don't know if they know how to hand pollinate or not, so I'm going to just mark it as mixed. But if I know that it was grown from Gudrun, who's a really amazing seed saver, I would know, oh, that's going to come out true to type. But for things that might cross, we also have this label that we just mark as diverse mix. So it's like we're going to accept this plant in the seed library where we have a stamp that says diverse mix. This actually one is intentionally a diverse mix from this plant breeder named Dianto. And we do have a cool thing called the auto seed wrapper, which I will send to you in the email that I follow up on, which is these are both made with the auto seed wrapper. So it's got 70 common species, so it's got the scientific name, it's got planting instructions, it's got seed saving instructions, and you just fill in the varietal information and the year and the varietal description. And the next year, you just change the year and you're ready to print your labels. So it's a really awesome way to be able to have high quality labels that you can share with other people. So I want to talk a little bit about this poster that we have that's available. It's a really great one for helping you if you're getting seeds from a seed swap or you're getting seeds donated to a seed library or just for your own benefit. Is, is it likely to be true to type or is it likely to not come out true to type? So we're really encouraging people to embrace diversity because there are many things in the home garden that will be very hard for us to save reliably. Corn is really hard for us to save reliably. Broccoli, Brussels sprouts, these could all cross very easily. It's hard for us to do that on a home scale. We still accept those in our seed library. We still accept those at our seed swaps, but we just label those as very likely diverse. If you are really risk averse or whatever, or you really want to kind of maintain something, the very likely as labeled species are a great place to start. So starting with common beans, peas, sweet peas, lettuce, tomatoes, these ones are really great in terms of like they will come out as labeled. The second category, the possibly diverse, if you grow more than one variety, it could cross. So for example, if I grew two different fava beans at the same time and they're flowering at the same time, there's probably a 30% chance that it's going to cross. Same thing with the runner beans. So we're going to kind of go through this level by level of like, is it likely to cross or not? Um, and so the first ones are these are the super easy, very likely as labeled tomatoes, beans, peas, wheat, going to come out like the parent. So if you want to get started in seed saving, or if you're have a seed project and you want to have people feel comfortable that they're not failing, not that there's a thing such as failing with seed saving, then these would be crops that you would start with. So within that, in the super easy category, we have seeds that are saved using the dry process, such as peas, beans, lettuce, and wheat, and then we have ones that are by the wet method, which is like the tomatoes. So it's once again, if you are trying to, we're community members saving seeds. So we try to separate things from one variety to another, but there's very little cross pollination between these plants because they're extremely self-pollinating. So on a commercial level, they say peas, one variety of peas should be 15 meters or 50 feet from another variety of peas. But if you put like two pea varieties right next to each other, the probability of them crossing is like 0.5%. So like from like a commercial standpoint, that's a problem. From a home scale, having two things next to each other with less than 1% chance of crossing, probably not a big deal. Same thing with like beans, like 100 feet apart from one type of bean to another type of bean, but it's less than a 5% chance of crossing. So for these species, we're not super worried about if you plant them right next to each other because the probability of crossing is really low. How do you know if your seed? So it's one thing to plant it, and it's another thing to then save that. So I have got some stuff here. Oh my gosh, I got crazy stuff here. So this is a fava bean, okay? And so you can kind of hear it kind of gets brown, like brown, and then you'll hear it's crunchy. So here's like a pea, and same thing, you can see like it's super dry and crunchy. Oopsie, they're flying all over the place now. Um, here's here's sweet pea, and if you don't get the sweet peas too soon, they will actually open up and splay all over the place, and you'll have them. And here, like just so you don't get the sweet pea, it will open itself up, and then they will go flying all over the place. And then with the peas, sorry, with the beans, you can pull the beans off the plant just as they dry and turn, crunchy. Or if you want to, you can also just kind of like, you can see this has a whole root, so I just pull the whole bean plant up. And then the thing to note with the beans and the peas is that there are weevils that can lay their eggs in them. And so you want to kind of shell them and then put them in the freezer for like 3 days or so. And that will kill the weevil eggs. And you won't know that it has weevil eggs until you go to plant them next year and there's nothing left but a shell. Like, ask me how I know. It's very, very sad when you go and there's nothing left. And then I want to show you what lettuce looks like. So you can see here in the picture of the lettuce, and the lettuce is starting to turn white and fluffy. And so I kind of do mine when mine are about like half white and fluffy. You can do it like by little pieces, like I'm going to cut off this little section and this little section and keep going back time after time. Um, because I grow a whole lot, that's just not really a system that works for me. So I just go and I just have a label. So this is like the lettuce mix. And then I have that this was done at my house, and then the year. And I also have an extra label inside the bag, just as an extra precaution. So, and then this is what the lettuce looks like when it's totally dry and ready to go. And so I can just take the seeds and kind of put them in my hand. And I'm just kind of, you should see my computer, it's like totally covered with seeds now. And I'm just kind of like, I can just do this with my fingers, and I'm getting the seeds out. I don't know if you can see. There we go. So there's a lot of seeds in there, and then this kind of process of like taking it, and you can kind of blow on it. Some people use fans, and then the lettuce seeds are heavier and will drop down, and the chaff or the other parts will kind of blow away. And then wheat, I didn't bring any wheat in, but wheat, if you grow wheat, it's so pretty to grow. And you kind of try to dent your finger and it doesn't dent, then that's when it's ready. Okay. So tomatoes, kind of the process is the first off, have a label. So here I've got a bunch of the Sebastopol tomatoes. This is kind of local from a local town. And so you can kind of see. You see, I have like these three. Like, I probably would not save this one. I'd probably just eat this one because it's kind of much smaller than the other ones. And then I just cut them in half, and I have like a jar with a little bit of water, and I just kind of squeeze them in. And the nice thing about that is you can still eat them, keep the thing. So I'd kind of do that with all that. And then you're going to let it go for a couple of days. And so after a couple days, this one I had to put into a little bit larger jar, but after a couple days, you're going to see this like funky mold floating on the top. Ugh. So there's like mold on the top. Gross, gross, gross. And there's something. And I don't know if you can see on the bottom, see how see, these are the seeds. So if they're not good seeds, they will float on the top. And the reason is because the seeds need everything this before the plant, all of the energy it needs to create a plant is in the seed. And if it floats on the top, it just doesn't have enough nutrients in to go through that whole process. But the ones on the bottom do. So you can pretty much just kind of, pour off the water, and anything that's floating kind of goes up there. And you can kind of just do this a couple of times where you take water and just kind of keep adding to it, and then just kind of pouring off anything that floats. Great. And then you can see in the end, I have all this seed. And then what I'm going to do is I just have I do it on a coffee filter. And then I just pour the seeds on the coffee filter and I put them out of, direct sunlight for, like a couple weeks. And then they should snap. Like I mean, whatever, you'll just kind of know when they're dry. But usually it's good after a couple of days to kind of separate them out because otherwise they kind of like glump up and just kind of doing that is a nice way. And the reason why we encourage people to do this fermentation process is because around the outside of the tomato, you can kind of see around the outside of the tomato, we've all seen this. You've got that gelatinous coat, and that gelatinous coat is a germination inhibitor. So it kind of prevents it from, growing into a little tomato seed inside of the plant. And so the fermentation actually breaks up that gel. And there's also a number of seed-borne diseases that are on tomatoes, and that fermentation process also reduces the some of those seed-borne diseases as well. Now, when you are saving and sharing seeds, it's very different. I mean, if you're using the auto seed wrapper, that's a great place to kind of start. However, you want to really think about that when we're sharing seeds in community, they don't come with the pictures and all of those descriptors. And the more we can inform ourselves about what good labeling looks like, the better quality our seeds are going to be when we share them. So, for example, is this a bush tomato or is it indeterminate? What's the size, the shape? How do I use it? Am I gonna make juice out of this? Am I gonna like freeze it? Good for salsa. Did it have any resistance to any particular things that are an issue in the area? Do I get my tomatoes in the beginning or does it go throughout the whole season? So these are all really important things to kind of note when you're adding a description and sharing those seeds with other people. And if you once again are looking for a particular characteristic, like you want to do canning, then start with, an open pollinated variety that has that particular characteristic that you're looking for. Okay. So next thing to talk about is like knowing your why. And so all the things I talked about before, tomatoes, lettuce, peas, those are all like you plant them, they're going to come out like the parent plant. Good. Now we're getting into things that might mix. And so we'll talk a little bit about knowing your why. And then you're going to make decisions based on, am I trying to keep this variety the same, or am I open to more I just want a fava bean and I'm not as concerned about the variety. So from here on out, if you see something in blue, it's specifically saying, how do I maintain that variety? Once again, just a note that it's really important to communicate what you did so that people know whether they're going to get crossed seeds or not. So if you are, yeah, so let's look at this. So like I said, at our library, we have, more of concerns around food security. So for us, being able to have seeds that we can share is important. And, we also are interested in having our seeds adapting to climate and food security. So there's a lot less ways to mess things up when you're open to some variability. So let's go into the details here on this one. So first off, what are some of the kind of pros and cons of different approaches so you kind of can think through this? So pure, once again, it's going to be uniform. That could be a positive thing. It all comes out at the same time. It could be a negative thing, which is all of a sudden there's a frost, and we don't get frost in this area, and all of a sudden like everything died. So pros and cons of that. It comes out as expected. That's great. But a downside is it could be more susceptible to shock, as I just mentioned. A number of people that have maybe been kind of casual seed savers have a lot more of like the, naturalized stuff, which it just kind of comes up in your garden, like the naturalized parsley and the naturalized cilantro and arugula and stuff like that. So there's kind of pros, there might be a little off typing. A garden variety is more of like, we're just doing the best we can as seed savers, but we might not have, the 100 feet isolation between two fava bean varieties. So there might be a little bit more mix, but it's still obviously a fava, mostly with the characteristics that we were looking for. And then diverse, if you're doing more of these land race mixes, whether they're modern land races or heritage land races, they're a lot less predictable. The taste could be better, the taste could be less desirable. Over time, it's going to be more resilient. There's going to be a lot more vigor in those plants as well. So how do we maintain a variety? So super easy plants, as I said, peas, beans, tomatoes, lettuce, those things, stick with those in that lane. They will come out true to type. Other things that cross-pollinate or hybridize easily, the things that you could do is you could isolate them by distance. So for example, as I said, if I want to do fava beans and I need 100 feet, I have to figure out I don't have 100 feet, so maybe I do some of the front yard and some of the backyard. So I kind of have some distance, but I also have the barrier of my house between them. I might also plant things that might be interesting, like flowers between one crop and another. So maybe the insects get distracted by, what's between it before it gets to the other fava bean. So those are kind of some things. And then another thing is you can also isolate by time. So for example, I could plant one type of fava bean in the fall and another one in the spring so that they're not flowering at the same time. So those are some strategies you can use to kind of do that. Now, when you're getting started, you really want to think about having garden records, like what is the seed source? Where did you get it? How old is it? Starting with good seed, talking with your neighbors. I was trying to grow Brandywine tomatoes for forever in a day, and then someone's like, you can't grow big tomatoes here. You have to do little, this is what we can grow in our neighborhood. And then thinking about planning your garden for seed saving. So isolation distance. It's also sometimes, a lettuce to eat might be this big, but a lettuce going to seed ends up becoming bigger. So sometimes you kind of pull stuff out to make space as you're doing your gardening. So let's get into the possibly diverse things that might mix. So fava beans and runner beans might cross. You know, two fava beans could cross, two runner beans could cross. If purity is not important, then you can just label it as a diverse mix and share it with people. In probably about a 30% chance if they're planted next to each other that they would cross. If purity matters, once again, as much distance as you can get, planting them at different times, planting them with spaces between, or just planting one variety. So thinking about how you're going to navigate that if you're trying to keep a particular variety intact. So peppers can self-pollinate, but they can also be insect pollinated. And the important thing to note is that hot is the dominant gene. What I've heard is that the distance between peppers is so geographic and insect dependent, but we don't know what it is. It's just like it can be 40 feet, it can be, like 300 feet, depending on what your geography and population is. I don't know what it is in our neighborhood, and I don't know if anybody does. But just know that peppers can cross. So if you want to save the seeds from a pepper and you want to keep it the same variety, you're going to do what's inside the box. So you can get these little party favor, you've seen the little party favor things. And just before the flower has even opened up, so this is like a closed flower, I just basically put this little bag on top of it. And then basically it will become self-pollinated and not insect pollinated. Once I start to see that fruit form, I can take this bag off, but I want to put a little marker on it so that I know that that's the one that I had the bag on. So they do actually sell bags for this purpose. So these are the bags that they actually sell, but I think the party favor bags are a lot more accessible for most people. The thing to note is that those jalapenos are not going to be ripe until they're red. So that's when the seed is actually red for this. And most things can't cross with other things from the different species, like a tomato is, you know, same genus as some other things, but they can't cross-pollinate. They can't produce seed. However, peppers are one of the few things where there's a lot of compatibility within different species. So you might think I'm growing two different species, but they can actually pollinate each other. So just note that that is a thing in peppers. But if you want to save the seeds and have it come out true to type, these are the way to go. Eggplant. Eggplant's a little bit hard to do. Same thing, you would do the same thing here. You just kind of do a little mesh bag to prevent it. that eggplant is going to be sacrificial. So you will not get the seeds until it is, yellow, when the eggplant turns like yellowy brown and kind of, you open it up and it's like brown inside, like that's when the seeds are ready. So if you want to save the eggplant, know that it's a sacrificial eggplant to do that. Okay. So one of the things for some plants, it's really easy. You're like, oh, I can save the seeds. I know where they are. They're right there. I can see them. But for a number of species, it's not super easy to know where the seeds are. Um, and also like a lot of things that we call vegetables are actually fruits. So if it contains seeds, it's a fruit. Zucchini, cucumbers, tomatoes, fruit, botanically speaking, at least. Culinary, different, but botanically they're fruits. A lot of the things that we eat, for example, lettuce, as soon as that stalk goes up, we pull it out. So we never actually see the seed. So people are like, lettuce has seeds. And I'm like, yeah, because we don't see it because we pull it out. Same thing with beets. So we pull the beet out and that ends the cycle because we're going to eat the beet. But if we wanted to actually save the beet seeds, it's going to have to go all the way to the stalk and it takes quite a bit of time. So another thing to note is that for, for some species, the seed saving commitment is way past the eating commitment. Like this, I can go and I can squeeze it out. I can make salsa and I don't need to keep it on. I don't need to keep that plant any longer in my garden. Whereas, the lettuce, like this is several weeks past the eating stage. And so sometimes knowing that the same thing would be true with the beets, way past the eating stage. And it also has to overwinter, so it needs to kind of go a much longer time. So the thing to note is that beet and chard are the exact same species. So they're both Beta vulgaris. If you let both of them go to seed, they're going to just like mix. I don't know if it'd be more beet-like or more chard-like. The other thing is they are biennial, which they need a cold storage period. They need to overwinter. If you like where we live in coastal California, it does not get cold enough. Like our ground does not freeze, so we can just leave the beets in the ground or the chard in the ground all winter and just kind of if you're looking for beet, you might like dug around and just kind of see how well formed the beet is and kind of put it back in the ground. But in other parts of the climate, in other parts, if you are coming in from a place that's really cold, I would definitely say look at the Seed Garden book by Seed Savers Exchange and see what they recommend in terms of that whole process, because that's kind of outside of my realm of experience because I don't have to deal with that here. I would say not a lot of people are saving beets and chard in their home garden. So if you are interested in saving beets or chard, I would just do like beets one year, chard the next year. And the seeds last for enough years that you will have what like you can still plant beets and chard, but each year, but you're only going to let one go to maturity to seed. So I can plant both of them and pull all the beets out and eat them before I let the chard go to seed. Okay. And these ones here, so corn, squash, melons, cucumbers, carrots, brassica, da, 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 da. So these are very likely diverse. So you can accept them, you can save them, but just maybe when you share them with other people, just mark them like this was the parent plant, you know, and then you can just write a little word like crossed or diverse mix. Squash is a little bit, squash is manageable, is totally manageable to do on the home scale. So I don't want to say that it's going to come out diverse, but just you need to actually do the management to make sure that it does not cross. So I'll talk about how to do that. But I would say corn, it's such a process, way beyond here. Same thing, brassica is such a process. Just note that it is very likely that if anyone else was growing any of those and letting them flower, it could cross. Okay, so when are the seeds of the fruit ready? So to save seeds, the fruit has to be completely mature. So melons, winter squash, like when you have a winter squash, like it's ready to go. Typically, when you have a winter squash, you will harvest it and then let it sit, for a couple months before you eat it, and that's also helping the seeds to mature. The peppers, as I said, are going to be ripe when they're red. Zucchini. So as I mentioned, you saw that picture of um, earlier about the mixed zucchini thing from Julia Dakin's project. So this was one of this. This is a yellow zucchini mix. So it was kind of yellowish green striped. And you can see how, I mean, one, it's not the zucchini that got away because I intentionally let it get this big, but this is like a winter squash at this point. So if I were to take my finger and try to put my fingernail in it, I can't. So I can't put my fingernail in it. It's as hard as a winter squash is. And then I pull this off and I'm going to still let it sit in my house for a couple of weeks before I open it up and save the seed from it. So know that it's a bit of a process. I typically let mine just when the plant dies, that's when I typically harvest them. And then I'll let it sit for, I'm kind of just usually lazy and I just let it sit for a couple months. It's not going to rot because it's like a winter squash. It's just sitting around, but just know like at least, here it says like 3 weeks. Same thing. I'm going to show you a picture of a cucumber because if you were to take the, and this has happened with me with zucchini as well. I think, oh, I got the big zucchini that got away, and I scooped out all the seeds, put them on a plate, and a couple days later, it was all papery thin. And that's the same thing has happened with cucumbers. If you harvest them immature and the seeds aren't, they're going to look big and plump, and then you're going to let them dry, and there's going to be no energy in it for it to actually have produced a plant, and they're just papery thin and trash or compost, I should say. So if you are trying to maintain a variety, a pumpkin, melon, or cucumber, you need to hand pollinate. The thing to note that there are four main species of squash, I can't even say this one, cucurbita, maxima. So you can see the species there, the machata, the pepo, and the mixta. The only one that we really put a warning on is the pepo. And for a couple of reasons. So we will tend to accept, like if someone brings in a Hubbard or something like that, or a butternut squash, and they didn't hand pollinate it, we'll accept it because it's like, probably mix it with some other butternut squash and it's gonna be fine. The pepos can actually, there's a couple of things. One, if you had a zucchini and it crossed with a spaghetti squash, that's just kind of weird. I mean, maybe sometimes, maybe for someone it's delicious. So that's kind of like maybe an odd mix that might be just like not super palatable for some people. But the one thing to note is that ornamental gourds are the same species as the acorn, most pumpkins, delicata, spaghetti, summer squash, zucchini, and they carry an extremely bitter gene. So I don't know how many people grow summer, ornamental gourds, but if anyone was growing an ornamental gourd near you and you didn't know it, and it cross-pollinated with any one of those, then that could pass on a very bitter gene, and that would be super, super undesirable. So we tend to not accept that species unless people hand pollinate it. So that's just the only kind of major caveat in this whole course, I would say. So if you want to hand pollinate, this is the process. So you go out late afternoon and you identify a male and a female flower. So how do you know on a squash if it's a male or female? So if you look at the base, so you can see on this one here in step one, this one has like a little round little baby on it. So that's going to be the female. And then the skinnier stick there, that's the male. So you go out, you see them and they look, nice. They've got a nice color to them. So they look like they're just about to pop open. So what you do is you tape them shut. I tend to put in this photo here from the person that shared these photos with us, they use masking tape. I tend to use painter's tape because I think it comes off a little bit easier and doesn't rip the petals as much. So you close up male and female, and you have to go out the next morning early, like before your coffee early. Because if you don't go out early, that flower one is so strong that it's wanting to like with all of its might open up so it can actually rip open. I've also seen it where bees have gone in and burrowed in, and you're like, if a bee got in there before you open it up, it had pollen on it, whatever. It's a lost flower there. So what you do is you go out the next morning, you literally disconnect the male flower, and you can see in step 3, the person has taken the petals off. So it's literally just like a little stick. and this is the male part here. And then they have the female flower open, and they just go in and kind of paint the center part with the male part. And then the important thing is you then need to close up the female and tape it back shut so that you were the one that transferred the pollen over. Nothing else brought in pollen. And then you're going to put a marker. If you remember the picture of the jalapeno that had that pink little tag on it, you're going to put a marker on it because eventually that piece of tape, that flower blossom is going to fall off and you're not going to know which one it was 3 months later that you had hand pollinated. So you want to put a little marker, not so tight that it strangles the stem, but enough that you'll be able to find it and not so loose that it falls off. So it's kind of a little bit of a game there, but at least it'll be close to what you did. Um, and there is a great video. Once again, you're going to get this slideshow. So if you see this later, when you see this later, you can watch the video of John Navazio, who was one of like the leading plant breeders in the United States for years. He recently passed away a couple years ago, but it's him walking the process through the process of how to hand pollinate and how to know. So really fabulous video on that. I would say start with squash because the flowers are bigger. The same process is true for cucumbers, but they're super small. And Dan, I see you have your hand raised up. Can you put it in the um here, I can unmute you. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was actually gonna say that there's some questions in the chat.
Okay, yeah, it's really hard for me to do this in the chat, so I'll probably just do that at the end. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because it's really hard to kind of navigate both paces, but we'll get to them at the end. But I do see, do seeds have an expiration date? I do see that one from Denise. Yeah, seeds definitely have a timeline. It's very species specific. So like onions and leeks, so things in that family like chives, within 2 years, like 50% germination rate. So that one's probably the most extreme. When I send you the resources after this, I'm gonna send you the list of how long the seeds are viable for, so you have kind of a bandwidth. And when should I freeze peas? Um, so I would, once your peas are dry, you do not want to put peas or beans in the freezer if they're not 100% or like really, 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 really dry, like those pods you saw were like, I mean, this is crispy, like this is a bean. So like if the bean or the pea is like this crispy, it's going to be fine to freeze. If this was sitting around for like 4 months and I forgot to do it, I would still just, shell them, or if they're already shelled, put them in the freezer just for a couple of days. One thing that I didn't mention about that is when you do take them out of the freezer, what you don't want to do is like uncap it because it's like it's cold inside, and then all this air is going to go rushing in, and you're going to get condensation on your seed. So just like when you take it out of the freezer, just let it sit for about 24 hours to acclimate to the room before you open it up if you feel like you have the need to open it up for any reason. Okay. Um, and a great question about the cucumbers. So with cucumbers, we tend to just mark them as mixed. Yeah, so it says cucumber flowers are so tart. It's a good, how do we know if it's actually got po pollinated? Well, you'll know if it got pollinated because the fruit will actually develop. So you'll know that it got pollinated, but you won't know necessarily who the daddy was. And so I would say in that case, we start with a cucumber mix. And so um, we're not really worried about it. But if you were trying to maintain a variety, at least make sure that you're only growing one type of cucumber if you're really trying to maintain a variety. And I'm lucky because I actually have two gardens, and one of my gardens at school is isolated enough. So when I do need to maintain a variety, I have a space there that I don't have to um, worry about drifting, drifting insects or pollen coming from other places. So a couple of tips on the hand pollinating of squash. As I said, start with the squash because it's easy. And then another thing, the male flowers are going to appear first. So what often happens is you plant your squash, you go, I'm going to plant two different, zucchinis or whatever. And then all of a sudden it comes time for like, you want like, wait a second, I want to go out and hand pollinate, and there's only males or there's only females. And so one way to get around that, or just like a strategy, is if you're planning on planting two zucchinis, for example, plant one zucchini, whatever, a little cluster maybe of three, and then sort out a couple extras if you don't need those extras. And then a couple weeks later, plant the other one. And so that case, like this one will be producing males first, and this one hasn't even been planted yet. And by the time that this one's producing, females, this one will be producing males. So you've got them. And then also you've got the mix of two different plants. So you have a higher, more genetic diversity because you're coming from two different plants versus the same plant. And then once again, as I said, you can also do the choose your adventure and just, you know, plant several different types of butternut or start with a genetic mix if that is where you're interested in going down that route. So this is the cucumber. So as I said, we didn't worry about like I just planted a genetic mix of cucumber, but you can see like that is a normal size. That one on the top, the eat me, that is a normal size cucumber. And that's like how much bigger? Like that's like it's like this big. So the like normal cucumber and then like the save me cucumber. And that's the exact same from the same plant. So you can see it got yellow, it got like brown and crusty. It was kind of like starting to crack. Um, so yeah, very different. Then you just kind of scoop it out. And once again, it too has that gelatinous kind of uh, germination inhibitor on it. So you want to sit it for a couple of days to remove that gelatinous coat and then decant and put it on a coffee filter. And the reason people say coffee filter versus paper towels is just that it comes off a lot easier off of a coffee filter than a paper towel. And with the very likely mixed, Brassica oleracea is the name of a species, and it includes kale, collards, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and kohlrabi. So all of those are the exact same species. So they can all pollinate each other, and those would be some interesting mixes. We do accept Brassica oleracea. So for example, I grow collards a lot. And, I just mark it as a collard mix, or I'll grow kale and I'll be like kale mix. Once again, if you only had one, if you were trying to save seeds and you only had one kale and you let it go to flower, it could possibly be that the seeds won't be viable because if nobody else around you was growing kale or one of those other things, it doesn't accept its own pollen. Just like I told you with that purple tree collard where I had zero, zero success the first year. So minimum population of two different plants, minimum. So many ways to cross. So once again, if you want to save it, that's fine. You could say the, mother plant was dino kale crossed question mark diverse mix so that people know that they may not be getting dino kale or whatever you were saving. Okay, so these are the main like kind of beware things in terms of seed saving. So as I said, the seed pepo and the gourds, that's the main one that we are concerned about. Once again, I don't know how many people grow gourds, but that is definitely a concern, health concern. Carrots and Queen Anne's lace. If someone was saving carrots and Queen Anne's lace was around, it's not going to be, poisonous. It's just going to be like woody. So it would just be inedible. And as I mentioned, if you don't save from a large population, it can also inbreed within my seed, Bill McDormand, my seed teacher said that could happen in 1 year. Like that reversion could happen really quickly. It doesn't necessarily happen quickly, but it could. It's hence the reason if you want to do the carrots and save carrots, plant a bunch, like I'm going to plant the rainbow carrot mix and let different colors go. Like I'm going to let an orange one and a purple one and a white one go. And so even though I only save from like 4 different plants, maybe, or 5 different plants, I've got enough genetic diversity in there that it's not going to do that inbreeding depression. It's not going to do that regression into its wild relative. And as I said, don't save from commercial hybrids, not because they're not going to come out true to type, but because they can introduce sterility into your lines. So those are the main ones you can see are listed there. So the onions, all those brassicas that I mentioned, including radishes and rutabagas, and then carrots, parsnips, lettuce, sunflower, beets, chards. So all those commercial hybrids, avoid. Okay. And then, as I mentioned earlier, some undesirable crosses could be, as I said, the zucchini and acorn squash or zucchini and spaghetti squash could be a little bit weird texture. So if you're growing one, just, stick with one lane there. Peppers, you might want to just grow if you're looking more for a mix and you're not super worried about it, stick with either all sweet or all hot. I think pepper mixes are a little bit more, I don't know if I want to say problematic. I would say pepper mixes would be a little bit more, I don't know the word is, but because heat, like a jalapeno and a habanero are really different heat levels. I don't know what happens when you start letting the genetics of the peppers mix around, that could be some interesting, um, that could be some interesting surprises if some people was growing it and you're like, oh. So just know hot is the dominant gene. These little bags are easy to come by if you want to save your seeds. If someone accidentally saves seeds from plants for CMS, would they know with the next generation? That's a great question. So I'm going to save that question and I'm going to ask someone who knows that answer. So I will ask, and I know you're part of the cohort. So that's a question that Bill McDormand would probably know, but we'll definitely get that answer to that question because I want to make sure I give you the right information. And for people that are just in here for today, I will make sure you get that answer as well. So the question was if someone accidentally saved seeds from a plant bred for us for cytoplasmic male sterility, those are the commercial hybrids, would they know the next generation of saved seeds? Okay. Okay. Let's see what else. And then Brassica oleracea, once again, there might be some weird things when you get like cabbage, cauliflower, but it's going to be edible. As Bill McDormand says, let us eat our mistakes. Okay, and then I think Denise had asked this question earlier about is my seed viable or not? So this would be the chart. This is going to be the chart that I'm going to send you. And so you can kind of see arugula seeds are good for about 5 years. Also, all this information is in the seed garden book. And there's a couple other places. Seed Savers Exchange also has a list of that just kind of has this out. So just it's a helpful thing as a reference just when you're looking through your own collection of like, oh, I've got this and it's getting old, maybe I need it, and I've got a lot of it, maybe I need to give it out to the community or I need to plant it out so I don't lose it. And these are things that you wouldn't necessarily need to remember, but it's just a nice reference sheet to print out. And maybe I'll print it out for the people that are in the cohort. So when we meet, I will have this for you. And then seed storage. So to make sure your seeds last long, it's good if they kind of are at a consistent, like the conditions are consistent. So as I said, first off, making sure, checking for pests. I know sometimes like right now I'm dealing with right now my garlic chives are getting like aphids all over them. And like they were perfectly healthy when they were growing. And right now, as they're going to seed, the aphids are getting them. So I will probably take some of that and once they get super dry, freeze them just to kill the aphids and then kind of screen out anything funky after that. So seeds should be fully mature and dry, stored in a cool, dark place. And the thing to note is that, it's temperature and humidity, but humidity tends to be a bigger killer than the temperature is. So you could do things like putting in silicone bags if you happen to be in an area where there's a lot of moisture. What else did I want to show you? Oh, next one's on there. Okay. And then seed cleaning. So seeds should be cleaned of debris as best as possible before you kind of put them away. There's a couple of different processes. You can see winnowing. So here's my neighbor Eileen, and she's just kind of taking the stuff and kind of like letting um, the wind take away the lighter stuff, and then the lettuce kind of just drops below. And once again, I have a little video that's going. And then screening. There's a couple different ways that screening. And so if you get into seed saving, it could be something as simple as just having a couple of different sized mesh things. I find different stuff at thrift stores and all that. You could also get into, having more of a professional set. So I also have larger screens. So I have like a set of 7 of these that I purchased, and they're all different sizes. And it can work a couple of different ways when you're doing something. For example, let's see, I don't know if I can show this, but I could do. So for example, here I have some cilantro and maybe I have some stuff. I don't know if this is gonna work. And if I put it through the screen, okay, if I put it through the screen, in this case, it's collecting, I know you can't see this, but it's collecting the cilantro. I mean, there's only a couple little seeds in there, but the other stuff fell through onto my computer. So there's screening where you let the seeds go through and you collect like the larger stuff. And then the other thing is you can also do it the opposite way, whereas you're collecting the seeds on the screen and then the little stuff is going through. So that's another way to kind of clean your seeds up as well. And then there's the shelling, which we saw just like with the, just taking stuff out of like the peas, the sweet peas out of the pod. So you've just got your shelling. We saw the wet process that was like the tomatoes and the cucumbers are pretty much the wet processing, and then the dry processing, kind of like the lettuce and kind of doing stuff like that. And then you can see here's a friend of mine, Lisa, where we had a big container of kale, and I just had a big bag, like a cloth bag, and she was just threshing it by just stepping on it and beating it down and then kind of breaking it up. And then we could put it through the screens to kind of remove the parts that we didn't want. Okay, so just kind of with talking about seed saving community, kind of pull things together, like be really clear on what's your purpose. Are you trying to maintain a traditional variety? Is food security or are you trying to do both? It's not to say that there's either, or you can maintain a traditional variety and do food security. Is it around climate resilience? Like, what is your why? So like start with your why. Be clear when you're communicating, what's specific about this particular variety. Does it have a story attached to it? Because I think when people know how special it is to people or to a person, um, then there's more of a commitment to stewarding that. So just really like label, label, label. And, I would say it's if you happen to run a seed library or something like that, having a little stamp that says like diverse mix is a really good place just to kind of so people can see that clearly that that's acceptable. And it's also part of like, what's in the collection there. Once again, if you are wanting to maintain a particular variety, referencing this book, The Seed Garden, is a great place to start, and it really would help you with a very likely and possibly diverse seeds. So that's kind of the way to go. Once again, those possibly diverse seeds, if you just plant one variety, you're going to really reduce your risk of of having cross-pollination. And then if you are wanting to go on kind of a wild ride, then working with landrace gardens, landrace varieties, and you can get those at Going to Seed. So Going to Seed, I don't know what time of the year it is, but they have free seeds that you can just, go in and say, I want arugula and I want chard and I want radish, and you can get up to like 10 different packets of different things. So if you want to start with a really diverse mix, they can get you going on that. So that's kind of an interesting way to go. And once again, be aware of those undesirable crosses that I mentioned earlier. But once again, also labeling these as diverse mixes if you were going that route. And then kind of just lastly, if I know this is through Richmond Grows today, but kind of the larger work with the Seed Library Network, if you are interested in learning about that, we do have a Substack that kind of goes through resources that we have, and our website has a ton of different stuff, and we also have a forum that people can be part of. And if you are a master gardener, I would just really encourage you to start sharing seeds through your seed library. Well, all of you, I hope you share seeds with your seed library. But like I said, if you're interested in teaching this class or want to have people teach this class in your community, I'm going to share the PowerPoint presentation with you. Everything in here is license free, so you are welcome to use anything. And then Organic Seed Alliance has tons more resources as well. So I know we only have a little bit of time, but I'm happy. So Diane, I think you were like available to unmute. Did you see any questions that I was kind of missing there that I didn't get to? I don't know if you're on your phone still or if you have questions down, this is a good time to put them in. I'm scrolling, I'm not seeing anything. Oh, you can't unmute yourself. Okay. Oops, yes. But if you have questions, you can put them in now into the chat.
I did not see anything. Did you
Yeah.
answer Mayor's? Oh yeah, you did.
I told, yeah, I told them I was going to get back to them on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to send, so yeah, thanks, Halima. Nice to see you. Yeah, so I'm going to the list. So you're going to get this whole slideshow, and then you're going to get an email from me, and it's going to have links to things like here's the seed viability list, so you know how to, kind of look at your seeds. And the thing to just like kind of a weird thing to note is when, so here, so like for example, this seed packet here, so commercial seed packet, a 2026 germination rate 96. This is 96% germination rate, but this seed could be actually from 2024. It's just that they didn't put it in the packet until 2026. But once they put it in a packet, they need to sell it that year. That's why a lot of seed libraries are able to get, or master gardeners are able to get free seed, because once it gets a timestamp, they can no longer verify that it's going to meet that commercial regulation of germination rate. So when we say, oh, it's got 4 to 5 years, it's like, well, we don't really know because this might already be 2 years old. So I think of the homegrown seed is, a lot like we'll know that the viability rate is a little bit more maybe accurate, hopefully. Any other questions? Anything else? Okay, so I will send out this resource. I have to get it uploaded and everything like that. And I will send out an email with all the resources. For those of you that are part of the, so some of you are here and you are part of our cohort. So we actually have a cohort in our community where we're actually going to be meeting in person. So this is kind of the first part of our group. So thank you for those of you that are, yes, everybody's going to get a recording. Everyone's getting a recording of this. Yes, yes, yes. And then some of you will be coming to my house in like 2 weeks, something like that, week and a half. Yay, awesome. So I don't see, will be getting a recording. Okay, any other questions? Okay, great. Yay, so we will